Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Motahara. I'm happy to be here, and I'm going to be hosting our industry panel. So welcome to our industry and academia synergy panel. In this next block, we will be having four scientists from nonprofit organizations, industry, or academia, and they're going to tell us about their professional journeys. So this will be followed by an interactive Q&A session, and let's get into this. First, we're going to have Dr. Greg Kiar, who is a research scientist at the Child Mind Institute, USA, where he focuses on evaluating and improving the trustworthiness of tools and techniques used to study the brain. He applies computational statistics, uncertainty quantification, pipeline development, and machine learning towards understanding and leveraging the numerical uncertainty in neuroimaging software. The goal of his work is to increase the transparency of published results, as well as the generalizability and robustness of biomarkers we derive from them. Welcome, Greg. The microphone is yours.
Perfect. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for showing up, everyone. So as a bit of background on me, gave us a few questions to answer. So in terms of my training, I've come through pretty much biomedical engineering programs the whole way through my education, with a little bit of electrical engineering thrown in when I was an undergrad. But that really doesn't tell the full story. I feel like these things, everyone always tells, the simplified or pretty picture version. Along with that, I lost my scholarships along the way regularly. My first lab in grad school, I was kicked out because I wasn't productive enough after a month. And, on a more fun level, I regularly skipped lab and work to just go play outside and exercise. So just remember that degrees and qualifications far from the full story. Throughout all of my education, I was really engaged with the software development community around brain imaging. So there's a lot of different tools that I've had the pleasure of working on. Some in more development capacities, some in kind of more leadership and planning. And so through all of that, it kind of led me down this path where my research now at the Child Mind Institute focuses on evaluating the trustworthiness of techniques we use to study the brain. And so while I'm a PI of a lab at CMI, it's a nonprofit organization that's primarily actually a clinical care facility. And so we both provide care to families and children, as well as produce, massive amounts of training materials for the community broadly. And so I'd say probably more than half of my time, I'm not actually involved in research at all. I spend a lot of time working on kind of frontline initiatives. Again, whether we're trying to assess the quality of a new intervention that we've developed or assessment approach, we're trying to move assessment questionnaires from lab-based assessments to at-home assessments, and we're trying to see essentially how effective these things can be. The goal is generally to increase the accessibility of psychiatric care. So a typical day is a fair number of meetings, which we all love. But really it's, big picture planning and a lot of the time. It's organizing experiments from the perspective of, establishing priorities and objectives and crucially defining what done looks like in a given context. In terms of actually, sitting there in the mud, getting my hands dirty and analyzing data, I do very little of that. It's a luxury when I get to, but in practice, I probably do, a full day a month is really what I am able to do in that perspective. So the next thing I asked us to tell you were, a few things that I wish I knew coming out of grad school. So first thing that I wish I knew was that I didn't know anything about time management. As a student, we tend to all have blinders on and a bit of tunnel vision to work on our specific project. The goal is very clear. We have a comprehensive, meeting at the beginning of our degree. Our supervisors all agree, here are the 3 or 4 papers you need to do, and then you can leave. So we know what we have to do for the next 4 years. We sit down, we work on those 3 or 4 papers, eventually we leave. In reality, once you're out of a degree context, whether you're running a lab or working in a broader context, there's many more plates to spin. And so what I really learned quite quickly was that that was a skill I hadn't developed enough. And so the main thing that I would recommend there is whenever you encounter this for the first time yourselves, try and find a workflow that's sustainable for managing your time. You know, there's all these different apps. There's GitHub boards, there's ZenHub, there's Asana, there's Jira, there's Monday.com. There's too many to name. There's Todoist, Trello, all these things that you've probably all heard of for time management. I've tried every single one of them. None of them have stuck completely for a long period of time because the workflow wasn't organic. And so finding something that really is organic with the way you like to work is essential. I don't know how much time I have. Are you guys going to cut me off? Cool. Sweet. The next thing that I was just going to say in terms of things that I wish I knew, I'll try and speed up, is that research doesn't start until after months of planning. And so again, as a student, we tend to come into a lab, we have an idea and we just go. But when you're at this kind of next step doing research, there's a lot of planning and work and organization that goes into it, whether it's getting funding or waiting for responses of funding, or even just massaging ideas to come up with something that really makes sense and will make a difference. You know, patience is really important for navigating that. And then the last thing that goes in line with me skipping work to go outside and play is that thinking counts as work. And it's a thing that I think I have a hard time still giving myself credit for. When you're thinking about your problems, that is a form of working on them. And just because you haven't physically ticked a box, that doesn't mean it's not productive. And so finding a way to do that thinking while you also make yourself feel productive is a very good thing. And so my way for doing that is, you know, I'll exercise while I'm thinking. And then the last question, or the last piece, which I'll spin through really quickly, is 3 tips and strategies for entering the workforce. The first thing is being honest with yourself about what you want. You know, we all want to or say things like, I want to be a PI, but we also say things like, I love data analysis. And those 2 sentences don't really go hand in hand. So thinking about what it is you really want is the most important place to start. The next thing is to get feedback from everyone all the time on everything. And this means, you know, whether it's your career counselor, whether it's your neighbor, whether it's your parents, whether it's your friends, your mentors, whomever, getting a lot of opinions is valuable. You know, it's one thing to research opportunities on Google, but you'll only find the search engine optimized results. You won't find, you know, real opinions and perspectives. And then the last thing is don't be shy to ask for what you want. And one example that we were actually just talking about up here a moment ago is, as was mentioned in my bio, I work for the Child Mind Institute, which is based in New York. I am the only employee as of today, but in a few weeks it'll be more, based in Canada. The only way that happened was because I asked for it to happen and they managed to make it work. And so it's, you know, I think asking for what you want is something that we tend to forget we can do and will essentially be the only way you can, you know, guarantee that your needs are being advocated for, is to do it yourself. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing your experience with us. Now we're going to move on to our second panelist, Dr. Nathalie Sanon. Dr. Nathalie Sanon holds a PhD in neuroscience and was a researcher at the CHU St. Justin Research Center and the Biology Zentrum in Dresden, Germany, working in understanding the basic mechanisms of epilepsy and brain function. Currently, she is a training program manager in artificial intelligence at IVADO, where she's leading several projects linked to the deployment of training adapted to an industrial clientele in full digital transition. She has been a guest lecturer at the University of Montreal's Department of Neuroscience. In parallel to her scientific and present work, she is very involved in the inclusion of people from groups underrepresented in science and AI, such as women, people of color, and indigenous peoples, and sites in several boards and committees, including Fondation La Calais, Fondation Camp, and the Women's Y, and the Salon International de la Femme Noire. Thanks for joining us and excited to hear about your journey.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting us here. I'm very happy. When I got the invitation, I was like, yes, all right. You know, I've been out of neuroscience for a couple of years now, and it's really a pleasure to be with you guys and to discuss a little bit, because I'm actually very jealous of what you guys are doing. Neuro-AI is really what I wanted to do, and that's the reason why I left research, actually, because we weren't talking about AI when I was still there. And so I decided to just switch and go to AI. But right now, as you'll see, I'm not even doing AI really myself. We'll get to that. So how did I get to where I am right now? I actually did a master's, as she mentioned, master's and a PhD in neuroscience at Université de Montréal. And then I went off to Germany to do a postdoc in adult neurogenesis. And I was working in basic mechanisms of epilepsy. So what's going on in the brain, what makes a brain become epileptic, but also a lot of very fascinating projects that involved Polytechnique, where we were looking at, the effect, how neuroparticles, can be integrated into the brain and in order to find an epileptic foci. As well, working on cannabis, which had just started to become 2017, just started to become, legalized in Canada, but trying to see how cannabis, or CBD rather, can be used as a treatment for kids with refractory epilepsy. Also studying sex-based differences in the brain. So that was also very, very, not weird, not at all, very interesting. And people were just not talking about that at the time. And so it was kind of it wasn't a new thing, but it was a new thing in neuroscience, I would say. We talk about, have you looked at both sexes? Have you, do you have rats, from both sexes? And they were like, why? No, I'm just going to use rat brains. I don't need, or rather male rat brains. I don't need, female, No, you definitely do. There are a lot of differences. So I think now people know that, but at the time it was always a struggle trying to explain why you needed to use both sexes. So after the postdoc in Germany, I worked as well in at CHU Saint-Justin as a lab manager and research associate. So taking care of the lab, all the projects, writing the grants. I worked actually with someone that, was very, very busy. And so kind of, let me do the whole thing. So taking care of the students as well. And so that's why, to me, being here today is really important, because it brings me back to that time where I would really help students kind of understand and see where they want to go. And the question, I think you were mentioning that, the question I would ask them is, what do you want to do later on? Do you really want to become a PI? Okay, then continue, do your PhD, and then do a postdoc. But do you want to, are you just not sure? They're like, I don't know, maybe work in industry. Well, then you don't need a postdoc. No. And you probably don't even need a PhD even. So that was something that was, I think, necessary for me to do, because the reason why was that I didn't feel that the PIs would actually give that away. They really wanted, and I understand them as well, they really wanted to keep the people in the lab, the students in the lab, working hard, long hours, not too much pay. But it was important, I thought, for the students to really know, well, you really don't need to go so far if this is what you want to do. Now, if you want to become a PI, then go for it all the way. So this is for my background. Average day, kind of like yours, I think, very similar. So unfortunately, lots of emails right now. I forgot to say, right now, I am no longer in research, as I mentioned. I work at IVADO. So I think some of you know IVADO. Who knows IVADO? Heard of IVADO? Okay, great. So IVADO is part of Université de Montréal as well, but it kind of makes a bridge with industry. And so we have over 120 industrial members from, big and small companies who are interested in, knowing how AI works and how to integrate that into their processes. And so we help them out finding, of course, students, but all of our academic members to do some work together so that they can, advance in that process. So my day right now at IVADO is really lots of emails, unfortunately. I'm more in a management position right now, which is not something I learned at all before, as you mentioned. Also, you know, I did neuroscience, and that was kind of it. Kind of. I'll continue talking about that a little later on, but you don't learn all of these soft skills tasks or different tasks than what you're doing in the lab. So I was an electrophysiologist, actually. So, you know, single cell recordings and, you know, with my brain slice all day, also with students afterwards, but, you know, that was it, right? So if I only stayed to that and stick to that, then it would be very hard trying to find a job that has nothing to do. Never know what happens in life. You know, for whatever reason, you don't want to continue into research anymore. And then you're kind of stuck with your electrophysiological skills, in my case, you know, or coding skills or whatever. But you need much more than that, because this is a problem that we see, is that students actually are very bright. They come out of a PhD, very bright. They know everything about AI in theory, great. But then the companies are not satisfied. And this is what we've heard from some of our companies, is that the students lack a lot of these, you know, soft skills, communication skills, how to, you know, manage time management as well. Because they're so used, as PhD students, we're so used to working kind of alone. Stop me whenever, right? Because I can continue.
Let's say maybe finish this idea up, and then
Yeah.
next question, try to bring in like one sentence. That way we have time for everyone.
One sentence.
Yeah, it's a little challenge.
Okay. What? Okay. So yeah, as PhD students, we're kind of used to working all alone. But then if we go and we move into industry, we're not working alone anymore. So this is something that we really, really need to work on. I hope I have the time where somebody asks me the question of what are exactly the skills that we need, and I will answer you. Please ask the question.
Easy question for the crowd, huh? So keep note of it.
Thank you for your really diverse set of experiences that you shared with us, Dr. Nathalie. Now we're going to move on to our third panelist, Dr. Angela Tam. She's from Perceiv AI. And Angela is a senior scientist at Perceiv AI, which is a precision medicine company that is developing a multimodal prognostic platform to forecast disease progression. Her research applies machine learning to medical data to develop clinical trial enrichment strategies and clinical decision support tools. The floor is yours.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. So the first thing they asked us is to go over our academic journey to where we are now. So briefly, I did a bachelor's in psychology, and then I did a master's in neuroscience, a PhD in neuroscience, and a postdoc in Singapore. So throughout like my PhD and postdoc, I was using functional neuroimaging with MRI and structural MRI to predict various traits, behaviors, and clinical outcomes. So like combining derivatives from MRI with machine learning to predict a bunch of different things. And then at some point during my postdoc, one of my friends from my PhD lab, he founded a startup, Perceiv AI, and he offered me a job. So I came back to Montreal. And so I've been with Perceiv for about 3 years now, working as a senior scientist. My day-to-day looks like probably very similar to being a PhD student and a postdoc, at least in my experience. So I do a lot of data cleaning, data processing, a lot of data analysis, running experiments, and writing reports for those experiments. I still attend scientific conferences and I still publish papers. So yeah, preparing all of that stuff. Now that I'm in a software as a service company, though, I do a lot more software development compared to my time in academia. So that's been a big change. And I write a lot of or at least contribute to a lot of different types of documents, like submissions to regulatory agencies because we're a medical device company. So submissions to the FDA, for example, and I provide a lot of scientific support during meetings with clients and investors. So yeah, that's about my day-to-day. Some things I wish I knew now to have made my transition easier was I wish, maybe this is very specific to being in the medtech industry, but I wish I kind of understood that there are actually a lot of different complicated relationships between, like in the healthcare ecosystem, between like, you know, not just like your potential user base being clinicians, for example, or like pharmaceutical companies, but also you have to consider healthcare insurers. So like, for example, RAMQ in Quebec or OHIP in Ontario, like what are they willing to pay for and reimburse clinicians to use whatever device you're proposing to put out in the market. And also obviously you need buy-in from regulatory agencies like Health Canada and like FDA and stuff. So it's actually really complicated to get a device out there from like the very beginning out to market. I was the first employee at the startup that I'm at. So there's been like a lot of crazy changes, especially because I joined before we had our first round of fundraising. So I kind of wish I had known like what it takes to really, well, I'm not exactly the one building the company, but yeah, I don't know. Seeing a company built from the ground up, it's a weird process. So yeah, I don't know, maybe wish I had the perspective of someone else who was in this position before. Okay, and then the last thing was tips for job hunters. Okay, so if you're not on LinkedIn and you want an industry job, you should definitely go on LinkedIn. And I would, if I was looking for a job, I would use a job title that is similar to the job that I want. So if you're looking for like front end developer, software engineer, data scientist, like use that as your job title rather than like PhD student at Mila, for example, because job recruiters are looking for data scientists. They're not looking for PhD students necessarily. So that's one tip. Another thing I would suggest is you should go to physical job fair events or like career networking, all that stuff. You get to meet a lot of different people. And if there are booths for companies that are looking for candidates, you know, it's a very easy way to talk with them and like make a pitch about yourself. And it's only through a lot of practice that you get more comfortable talking about yourself and what kind of skills you have. And you get to learn a lot from different companies about what kind of profiles they're looking for too. And if you're interested in being an industry scientist, if you have time to go to conferences or like whatever conferences you go to and you know that there are some industry scientists that are going to be there, I would suggest like try to meet them at their posters or their talks or something, and you know, see if they have a few minutes to just like network a little bit with you and ask them about their experiences. Everyone's been in your shoes, like sitting in the places where you're sitting. So we're always happy to, you know, give whatever little wisdom we have out there. And yeah, I think that's all I've got.
Thank you. So last but not least, we would like to welcome Joseph Viviano from Mila. Joseph has a bachelor's in psychology from Queen's University, a master's in neuroscience from York University, and a master's in computer science from University of Montreal. In between, he has worked in applied research in psychiatry, radiology, large-scale search advertising, finance, and RNA biology. He's currently working as a research engineer at Mila with Yashao Benju's group to help popularize and apply GFlow nets and emerging ML technology to ML for science problems in collaboration with external research organizations and companies. He also supports alternative venues for scientific impact via the technical mentoring of early stage technology companies with Creative Destruction Lab. Welcome, Joseph. Happy to hear about your journey.
Thank you. I had a really weird career trajectory, so I'm going to start from the beginning and kind of work through it because it gives you a sense of the things that you can do instead of going straight through a PhD. So I studied psychology because I had no idea what I wanted to do in 2005, graduated in 2009 during a financial crisis, and I basically couldn't find anything to do. But I did some soul searching. I had some friends who went to grad school and realized that I wanted to learn how to code. And from where I was, the next best step was felt like it was a neuroscience. It was more of a hard science. And if you do something like fMRI, you have to collect a ton of data and spend all of your time analyzing it as opposed to slicing brains and learning all of those technical skills. So I did high resolution fMRI of the thalamus. We're one of the few labs in the world that were doing this kind of thing. I spent a ton of time learning about how to program in MATLAB and Python, statistics, dealing with noise and this kind of issue. And by the end of my master's, I was really like, this is not going to help anybody. And I didn't know what to do with that. So I throughout my entire path, I was always just following gradient descent towards like sort of impact. And it took me all over the place. So I ended up working at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto, where I was trying to apply what I knew about programming and neuroimaging to biomarker development. And I was working in a lab of around 20 people as like a computational backbone team, where we were combining genetic data and neuroimaging data to figure out if we could find markers of treatment response in psychiatric populations. I did this for about 3 years, and we were teaching ourselves machine learning. The building I was in was right beside the computer science department at U of T, where Jeff Hinton invited Joshua Bengio for a talk. And I didn't really know that much about the research that they were working on, but it had something to do with the relationship between brains and deep learning. So I went and had went to see the talk, and I was blown away by everything. This was in 2016. And I thought, okay, how am I going to learn this stuff as well as the people that are doing this research? And the answer was like staying up until midnight studying every day after work for a long time. It was really, it took a lot of sort of self-motivation, but you can do it. You can decide you want to learn anything and then just like put in the hours and eventually you'll get there. And so by the time 2018 rolled around, I had the opportunity to join Mila, and I did a second master's degree with them. And I really focused on the areas of machine learning where there were clear applications that most of the researchers in computer science didn't seem to be that interested in. And so I was doing a lot of work in radiology, and which actually is, I mean, it's a huge applications domain, but a ton of people in like pure ML research aren't that interested in this field. And I ended up working for Mila's applied research team, where we were working with, we worked with CDPQ as a large pension fund in Quebec. And that was all well and fine, but I felt like I was drifting too far from the impact part. And meanwhile, there was this huge development in the AI for drug discovery field. And so I ended up working with a company called Deep Genomics, which is in Toronto, and I learned a lot about RNA biology. And after working there for a year, I actually had the opportunity to join Joshua's group, applying machine learning to a wide variety of AI for drug discovery problems. So I took the opportunity. And that's how I got to where I am today. I've jumped fields way more than is reasonable, and I don't recommend it. But I'm really happy now because I'm more of an individual contributor. It's quite different from what the people here that have followed a more linear path through sciences tend to be PIs by now. But it's actually a very gratifying position to be in as well. It just depends on your personality type. So my average day is a lot of coding, and I spend time in meetings, and I try to minimize those as much as possible. I think it's wise for all of us to do that, but of course they're necessary. And the major difference is that now I'm running many projects in parallel, as opposed to what I think like your average research project, which is, you get to dive into one thing for months on end. And so learning how to juggle all of that, it becomes a really important skill, I think, no matter which path you choose through all of this. So the earlier you can do it, the better. Aside from that, I think the difference is, earlier on when I was doing research, you kind of think, okay, what are the questions I want to ask? And I think if you follow the kind of more applied path that I followed, you need to be really good at asking other people questions about what they need, and then figuring out how the science can help them achieve those goals. And so I spend a lot of time also having those kinds of conversations. What do I now know that I wish I knew before? When I was in high school, I was told I was not a math person. And I really took that to heart. I'm sure people have heard this kind of thing before. That I don't believe that kind of thing is real. You may not jive with the way that something's being taught to you, but if you can learn how to teach yourself something, you can basically learn how to do anything. And I wish I knew that a long time ago, because that probably added 5 years to my career. The other thing that I wish I knew earlier was the power of like your network, as opposed to sort of traditional forms of social proof. If you go to Harvard, everybody's going to listen to you just because you went to Harvard, but most of us will not go there. And there's another way to get social proof, which is to, you know, to be helpful to people around you and to be engaged in your community and build that network out. And then just 1 or 2 connections can really make a big difference in your life, and you don't know where they're going to be. So I think that being sort of like a good social force in your community can have a huge impact on your trajectory. And so that actually plays into the key tips and strategies as well. I think it's not good to treat people transactionally, but I do think it's really good to help people around you without any expectation, because that will have a major impact on your in the long term. I'm really a big believer in karma. And the other thing is that having jumped between so many fields, I really believe that most of the sciences are trying to solve the same kinds of problems. And if you can learn those patterns and learn to identify them, you can start to see really interesting solutions that other people won't see. And the only thing that separates a lot of these domains is basically learning a new language. And it's a pain to learn a new language when you transition fields, but it's definitely something that you can do. And that will unlock a lot of opportunities that might seem closed to you if you're only used to thinking about one thing. So thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Now we're gonna move to Guillaume, which will be moderating the Q&A session. He's a PhD student at psychology UDM and doing computational neuroscience.
There we go. Thank you, Nathalie, for the introduction. And thank you to our panelists for being here today and giving us some of your amazing time. So we'll start the discussion with some of our questions that we prepared for the panelists. And we invite everyone here to come up and ask questions throughout any time in the discussion. So I'll kind of start off with a question relating to it seems like most of you are working on multiple projects at the same time, juggling multiple ideas. So what are the best strategies in project management to work efficiently and define your priorities in your day-to-day professional work life? I can repeat the question if it was a bit too loaded. Yes. Yeah. So, you know, when you have multiple projects, it seems like you can easily kind of get thrown off and kind of work on too small stuff, and you need to delegate at some point, you know what you should be working on when.
Yeah, so well, the word delegate, I think, is an important one. So I'm not sure if any of you have worked directly with Alan Evans over at the MNI, but his favorite expression is you have to manage with the 3 Ds, which is decide, delegate, disappear. And you get good people, you make a decision, and then you hand it off and focus on the next one. And I think to kind of answer this question, another supervisor I've had, really liked the phrase, finding your area of excellence. And it's basically, what are the places where you can be most useful for a problem? Be there, work there. Once that is done, once you've gotten it through the area where you can thrive, where you can provide unique value, you can disengage and try and find somebody else whose area of excellence overlaps with what is needed next. And so I think it's, again, kind of back to the idea of what do you like? Are you good at? Where do you uniquely shine? And make sure that as much of your work as possible falls in that bucket. And if you have a bunch of work that doesn't, you maybe need to hire somebody or collaborate with somebody who has those skills so that they can take those pieces, and again, you can both just shine more effectively. So I think it's really that. It's work on what you're good at or what you want to be good at, rather than just the monotony.
If I can just kind of interject there. So how do you think you find out? So you were saying, you can pick up something you want to be good at, but then how do you figure out what you are good at in something that you haven't tried before? And this kind of reaches to your point of, if you want to learn anything, you just gotta kind of put your mind to it and put in the time to it, It's
the time that's the important thing.
Gotcha.
And that's kind of organic, right?
Yeah.
Time, like it's hard to force yourself to spend time
Yeah, I think it helps to have, like, when you have a lot of projects, you need to see them all at once. Just like have a board that has, it seems cheesy, but it really works. And in that case, I had one goal, so it was really easy. But now I have like a ton of different stuff I've got to juggle, and they conflict, and you have to prioritize. I don't know. I just find it easy to look at one board with everything.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
So at my company, we like to use task management softwares like Asana. Because at a company, you're all working towards like the same mission, like developing one specific product or like multiple, and you work in teams. And even though I do a lot of leading of the research, I still have to coordinate with a few other people. And so we each have our own pieces of like the same project. And so what we do to coordinate with each other is, like I'll be responsible for this specific part, and it's going to be due on like this specific day, and we have to just identify like what we need to get there, and just like who's doing what and by what time. So we really like set deadlines for ourselves, and I think that helps to push things forward.
I think it's also good to recognize that we're all different and we have different ways of working as well. So what might be good for one person is not necessarily the same way for another. And just accept that, you work a certain way, which may be very, very good, but not good for that other person. And that's what makes a team also so rich. We need to keep that in mind.
I really like that point. I think at the end of the day, learning more about yourself and how you work and how you operate is only going to be beneficial, really. Okay, so my next question kind of relates to Greg, when you're talking about time management tools and whatnot. So what are the fundamental tools and resources that you have found useful in your day-to-day research that was not introduced to you in the university life? And so this is to kind of also follow the theme of this panel of the synergy between industry and academia.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, it was probably actually using task management software properly and not just as a massive to-do list. Like you can make that Trello board and whatever to-do-list list that has the 37 things you need to do today. Or you can actually design, workflows properly where you can see prioritization, you can see what is a roadblock for other tasks, what is downstream, what is upstream, where are you blocking other projects versus what other projects are blocking you. So one that I've been using lately is Monday.com. And the thing that I really like about it is automations. You can automate a lot when you have different, tasks. So for instance, say a new project comes on board, we can automate the process of creating a new project, inviting the person who asked for it, making them fill out a bunch of information so that I don't have to do anything until all of that information is there and ready for me. Which makes it then much easier for me with all of that information to sit down once and design the plan for everything we do next. So again, I think, but most importantly, to Natalie's point, we're all different. We all have different styles and preferences and different things that stick. And as I said, I'm using this lately. But what I said earlier was that nothing has ever stuck for me before for project management software. It's a matter of finding something that is sustainable for you. And so, again, I don't think there's a one size fit all, but I think having someone not just tell you, hey, this platform exists, but here are different ways you can work with it to make your life easier. That was a thing that I didn't have in grad school that I have found incredibly valuable since.
All these tools did not exist when I was doing my PhD. So I imagine like who's using a tool, whatever, kind of tool like Asana, like all these tools that are you guys using? 1, 2, 3, a little bit. Okay. Oh, really? But these tools are there. Some of them are free. Asana is free, for example. You have no excuse. In my time, it just didn't exist.
If you want to learn how to use those tools really well, just do an internship at a tech company. They'll like force you.
No,
Yeah.
it's true. It's true. I don't have any choice but to use Asana or to like write Jira tickets or whatever. I have to document everything for a lot of different like industry standard reasons. So
Yeah, I learned a ton doing a few internships. I think it's a really good experience.
Oftentimes in academia, it feels like we're kind of being as you said, streamline, like PIs identify talent and they kind of want to keep you almost like in a bubble to keep on going. How do you find time? How do you find time or the resources to explore other things, like say different subfields and identify like other passions or where your talent is at? Like, does it involve just taking a break from your degree and taking a gap year and trying to find random internships, or is there more of a strategic way to do things?
So that was one of my points that I wanted to talk about, was don't do only your PhD or your master's or your studies. Never do only that. As I said before, you don't know what can happen later on. To me, you know, I completely changed fields, right? And it was kind of easier for me to go do a little bit of management, although I had never, you know, I didn't study in that. But I had been very implicated in different organizations, doing some voluntary work, being on boards of different sorts. And so that's where I kind of learned all of these other skills that you absolutely do not learn in the lab, at least not back then. And so very important on the weekends. I don't know, I was just really also very interested in, you know, different, I'm of Haitian origin, so I was very implicated in the Haitian community as well, trying to encourage young girls into STEM as well. So all of these were things that I just did on the side in parallel to, you know, my electrophysiology. But it's definitely something, as you mentioned, I think that you're spending time on it, you're giving, but you're also getting a lot back. So I learned a lot, and this is what helped me now doing the job that I'm doing, whereas I don't have necessarily, you know, I didn't study in that. I didn't have, you know, the qualifications at first. If you only look at my PhD, but look at all the rest, and yes, I do have the qualifications.
Yeah, one thing that that I think I'd add too is the answer we give to every question. Everyone is different. Everyone's situation is different. But it's basically that, you know, depending on the skills you want to learn and the, you know, roads you want to explore, depending how close or far they are to your project, or what your PI is trying to push you to do, or what have you, you know, so there's going to be ways in some cases where you can steer your project to incorporate them. And so, you know, one thing that I was fortunate enough to be able to do was essentially pivot my entire like PhD work around something that I found really interesting, because all that it needed was, you know, a bit of salesmanship to convince my PI or the field more broadly that it was actually not so different from the question they were already asking. And so I think, you know, the point of that is really sometimes it takes a bit of creativity where you just have to put everything, again, as we said several times as well, put it on a board. What are all the things you have to do? What are all the things you want to do? And try and find creative ways that you can bring them together as much as you can, because, you know, to Joseph's credit, it's really challenging in my experience to spend, you know, evenings working the whole time when you spend a day working. Like, that's just not a thing that is sustainable for me. And I've had various times in my life when I've done more of it, and I've realized I just can't do that anymore. I'm not happy when I do. And so for me, it's really been essential to try and merge the two worlds, the skills I have to demonstrate and the skills I want to learn, in order to actually, you know, benefit from these things. Just because, again, in my case, I'm very bad at doing it in my off hours.
I think this goes back to what Greg was saying, like, don't be afraid to ask for what you want. So if there's something you want to learn that you want to like apply to your research, but haven't done it yet, and I don't know, don't be shy to talk with your advisor or like someone else, like to see how you can incorporate that in your research. And yeah, I think like always, it's cheesy, but like always follow your passion, you know, that's going to be for sure the biggest motivation for you to do anything, right? So you know, your time is finite on this earth, so might as well spend it doing something you really want to do.
This is too high for me. Oh. Yeah, but this is a bit high for me. Okay, so yesterday we had a workshop on open science, and a lot of these skills we are promoting in the sphere of open science is actually collaboration and work with people. And I have heard a lot of people in that sphere when it comes to the transition stage of their career, they have started to feel academia has failed them, and they're all looking to industry. Do you feel like is there more opportunities now comparing to the past that there are more alternative paths for researchers to enter industry than say 10 years ago?
I think there's a misconception that if you want to do science, you have to stay in academia, and that is like certainly not true. My job title is senior scientist, and there's lots of different scientists in pharmaceutical companies doing maybe some similar things to like what you're doing if you're trying to do like drug discovery or making a clinical decision support tool or trial enrichment strategies, like a lot of different things. Also using machine learning as well. What else? Yeah, there's lots of biotech companies too, CROs. So yeah, your skills can be applicable in a lot of different places, especially if you want to stay in science, but go somewhere else, you know, like straight into tech, for example. Lots of scientists work in tech also. So yeah, don't be afraid to look for different opportunities if you're not interested in staying in academia.
And I would also say there's shades of gray here too. There isn't industry, academia, and nothing in the middle. I mean, again, my job is a pretty good example of living in the gray. Like I write NIH grants and I do things that are funded by, you know, corporate style projects. And so there is a place to live in the middle. So I do think that there's again, I can't really speak to the past since I wasn't in the job market when the past was. But I would say there's plenty of opportunities for researchers outside of academia. I'd also say, to the point you mentioned at the beginning about collaboration and how there's a lot of that in the open science community, like that's really the point. I would say that collaboration skills are extremely important, especially if you want to make your skill set broad. It's important to be able to communicate what you know, communicate what you don't know, be able to listen to other people sharing those same things. And as long as you have that, then you can kind of fit into any puzzle where the piece is missing. And so I think that developing those collaboration skills and, you know, being involved in things like the brain hack community are incredibly valuable and will make you much more versatile for whatever it is you decide you want to do.
I just want to even add to this question because I think it's such a relevant question. What do you guys see for the future of the collaboration between academia and industry? Do you think there's going to be a certain convergence between these two settings, or do you think rather there'll be a stronger interaction or potentially one encompassing the other one?
I hope they don't encompass each other.
I definitely agree.
I don't know. I think that there's probably could be more synergy between industry and academia in Canada. And, you know, ideally we model more what you see in the Valley, where you have the people at the universities know the business leaders and the investors in that community really well. And it just makes it easier for people to transition between those fields. But I don't think it's going to be like categorically different than what we have now.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It should absolutely not be completely, you know, you really need strong academia that continues to do work that seems to the industry to be useless, seems to be useless, but is actually very important. So definitely not, but it's true that at the same time, I think there should be kind of two paths, I guess, within the academia. One path where you're more industry, you know that you don't want your own lab, you know you don't want to necessarily do research, but you really want to get the knowledge, so that, you know, that would be one path, and then the other path is really going into, you know, deep.
Yeah, so one thing in industry that was actually a hard thing, it's one of the things I wish I knew before. So depending where you're at in industry, they really care about what is scalable. So in academia, I think we're really incentivized to work on things that are extremely bleeding edge, like no one else is working on it. It's extremely novel and innovative, or that's what we think at least. But the thing is, when you're at that stage of research, there are so many barriers of adoption to the real world, and that it's painful. And that's why it's called like bleeding edge technologies, right? And so in industry, because they want to bring something to the real world, have a wider user base and everything like that, once you transition to industry and doing industry research, you're not really using technologies that are, too expensive, inaccessible. Only a very small amount of people are using it because it's, rare and like computationally expensive and whatever. Even if the gains in performance are good, if it's a logistical nightmare to implement in the real world, it is not going to be adopted, or it's going to take a really, really long time for it to be adopted in the real world. So that's something to consider. I think there is a lot of space for, proof of concept studies that academia still generates, and that stuff is important. But I think if you're thinking, further along the development pipeline, you have to really shift to using different modalities that are, easier to access.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the relationship that they'll continue to have, I think at the end of the day, it's important to remember the objective of either an academic lab or a company. Both of their objectives is to survive. Well, the way that an academic lab survives is by demonstrating novelty, which means they come up with something new, they publish a paper, they get a grant, they come up with something else new and something else new and something else new. The goal is never to take them to market, because that's not what funding agencies will reward, that's not what journals will reward, that's therefore not what tenure review boards will reward. So that's academia. Whereas in industry, the way you survive is by continuing to get money. And the way you continue to get money is by demonstrating value. And the way you demonstrate value is by, again, whether it's delivering a product or a service or otherwise convincing people that you have value. You're good at fundraising in some capacity. And so given that these two things are, they're not necessarily in alignment with one another. One is I'm going to continue to show you something shiny. And the other one is I'm going to build something robust that has value. Or again, convince you that I've created something robust that has value. And so I don't necessarily think that they will ever collide because of that, but there is certainly room to play, and as like play in the middle. And I think like Angela's work and my work are great examples where we kind of are somewhere in this middle space where we have elements of both in our jobs. But I can't imagine them getting too much closer until incentives change in one or the other.
I heard a really good quote about this, which was by the CSO of a big deep tech company that basically said they would never work on anything unless there were 5 published papers on this topic, because they didn't want to take on the risk of trying something for a year that would turn out not to work and not end up in the product. So if that level of creativity isn't going to work for you, I think you'll be much more satisfied, intellectually, artistically in academia. Because in industry, if you're in a company that's taking those kinds of risks, you may not have a job in 2 years. That's something to think about.
I think maybe unless you work at a very, very large company where they will have the financial resources to put into those riskier ventures.
All right, well, thank you to all our panelists. In the interest of time, we're gonna have to cut it short, but I think we hit a gold mine and could probably keep talking for a couple of hours. So I just want to
We can't answer the last question in 1 sentence each.
Absolutely, let's go for it.
Try to stay short. My question is a bit related to what you have already said, but like the world of artificial intelligence kind of changed really quickly, have a really fast paced, and when you work in between, not solely on artificial intelligence, sometimes I feel you kind of have to update yourself so much, and your work is maybe unrelated if you do when you start 2 years ago, and after that there's new stuff and everything. So I don't know how, in terms of industry or even in terms of research, if you're not solely working on artificial intelligence, how do you kind of make the time to update yourself with the space of actual AI research field?
I'm happy we took this question.
What I would just say quickly, in trying to keep it to 1 sentence, it might be 2, is try and learn like the framework rather than the state of the art, because the state of the art will always change. you know, whatever the latest model architecture is will always change. The latest, you know, paradigm for training or optimization, these things will always continue to evolve. So focusing on them is not necessarily the most efficient use of your energy. Focusing on a conceptual understanding of what they're trying to accomplish, and then you can essentially put in whatever new black box comes out into that place. It'll allow you to, you know, kind of translate your skills and update them much more readily. So I think it's kind of like the language piece that Joseph was mentioning earlier. Like, it's when you understand the structure of language, it's much easier to pick up new ones. And so I think it's the same kind of thing, thinking about it from the perspective of, this is the category of skill, this is the type of, you know, technique, and however it evolves is, again, you put it in place whenever you need to in practice.
I would answer, we used to go to school, you know, learn a bunch of skills, and then ready to go to work, and then we don't study anymore, or we're not into that anymore. Now we're really in a lifelong learning. So this is how we need to think of it, and especially for AI, for anything, but especially for AI, as you're saying, because it's always changing. So always think that you need to continue reading up, you know, continue learning those new techniques, or, you know, putting those into those boxes. You really need to change that framework. We're not in the same thing at all anymore.
I think okay, for me, I mean, I don't have time to keep up with like every new thing all the time, you know, because, well, one, like I work at a really small stage startup, so everyone has to do like almost everything. We're only 5 people, and yeah, but I think like if it's something you really want to like do to keep up with like the newest technologies, then yeah, sure, go for it. But I think sometimes, you know, just because something like is new and like upcoming, it doesn't mean it'll always be like readily adopted either. So I think it really depends on like your use case of like, what is it that you're working on? And like, do you actually need that like latest like breakthrough or something? Because, you know, well, at least in industry, like if something works and it works well enough, then like, let's go for it. Like it's easier to push it through to market, for example. And like there's a lot of hesitancy in like applying new things, especially when you work in like medical devices. So that's just like my personal experience.
I guess I would say consistency is the thing that's most important. If you really want to keep on top of something that's moving as fast as AI, just read about it every single day and do that for years, and it'll become easier. But it's going to be something that you have to really invest in if you care about it. And I think that there's like a compounding effect with this sort of thing, because as was mentioned, most of the stuff that's coming out isn't that relevant, but you don't know what it is until you've read it, or until you notice those patterns and you're like, okay, I can skip this one safely, but you won't get there unless you really invest a lot of time. So I think that's what it comes down to.
All right, so thank you so much for all the wisdom you've shared with us. If you can leave us with one sentence of either a word of wisdom or any advertisement you'd like to plug to the people in the room, the floor is yours. We can start with someone else if you want.
The network thing again. I really think it really pays to help people without expectation.
I get asked about imposter syndrome a lot, so I get it. Like I still have it all the time, but yeah, don't let that pull you back from achieving what you want.
So I had mentioned earlier some points. I'm going to give them to you right now. Because these are really points that come from actually like a grant that we wrote with a collaborator in order to be able to have training for students. So communication skills, deployment of ML solutions, not just, you know, working on the ML, but how does it actually deploy into effective data visualization, code structure, making sure that it's understandable by other people and not just for yourself. Use project management tools and collaborative work, and teamwork. So these are some problems that industry sees with new PhDs, new workers that were PhD students before.
All right, well then, to take you up on the first part, shameless plug. Child Mind Institute, we're growing in Montreal. Send me an email. Now the more useful piece. You know, as you said, or as we noticed, we kind of ran out of time. We only had an hour. I'm sure this applies to the rest of us as well. Our email inboxes, our phone numbers, whatever, are open. Feel free to reach out to us. We're all here to help and have all been in your shoes or some permutation of them. And it's the most important thing is to, again, listen to what it is that you want to do and ask for help getting there. And we're all going through the same thing. So remember, you're not alone.
Thank you for all your helpful answers. Please give them a loud round of applause.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for attending this workshop. We will now have a 1-hour lunch break, and lunch will be served in the atrium, and follow just the signs, and you'll find it like yesterday. Thank you.